Conclude.
Thank you, Chair. I chaired the start of this debate and I've been watching it on the monitor for the last hour and a half. I head down to speak at the end. I value this debate hugely. It's a huge issue on the ground. I wouldn't want it to believe that people are not interested. I'm very interested, right, and have been watching it with great interest. Secondly, can I just deal with it in a practical way, right? Minister, if my view on it, and I spent many years in practice, self-employed, I dealt with landlords were my clients. I dealt with them on the ground. Equally, as a public representative, I deal with tenants. I also deal with landlords. A couple of features are arising, and my view is we're doing catch-up. We won't get everything right. If something isn't working, it should be changed. So just, I suppose, a few observations. Number one, on we'll say the rental pressure zones, they're coming in. But ultimately, our problem here is a supply issue. I think everyone will accept that. If we had sufficient supply, we really probably wouldn't need rent pressure zones because the market itself would stabilise. In some rent pressure zones, they're based on electoral areas, and in some cases, it's based on the average. So you may have an electoral area that has exceptionally high rents in certain areas, exceptionally low rents in another area, but the average rent is below the national average. They keep outside the rent pressure zone. Equally, you could have an area where it's all homogenous and they come in. So I know this Ministry have made changes within the legislation in that area. Secondly, we're getting it from landlords, right? Everyone at some stage in their life rents. I rented many years, and even for the first years, we bought our house a number of years after we were married. It was standard of the time. It's a modern feature. Irish people, deep in their psyche, espouse to own their own home. It's deep in our psyche. It was probably because we're ruled by the British for 800 years. We want our own home. And Senator McDougall made reference earlier about the Vienna style. Yes, we have to move and we have to look at the rental model. We cannot get away from the fact that deep in our psyche, and that's why I think it's critical we move, and we are moving that direction, where we make affordable housing available to people, particularly young people. And they're across the source of spectrum. I've known people coming to me in professions and they cannot get a mortgage. A young teacher came to me, she could not qualify for a mortgage. Secure employment, right? So I think the affordable model is absolutely key. Secondly, there is anomalies within the system at the moment. So for instance, if you have, and I'll go on the tenant first. If you have a rogue landlord, they can make a tenant's life hell. Substandard accommodation, keeping their deposits, harassing them, right? Equally, if you have a rogue tenant, they can effectively use the deposits to not pay their rent. The landlord ends up taking him to the RTB, and the whole thing is an unqualified mess. So, and you could have a landlord, and I have some of them, who would have kept their rent at a relatively modest level for their tenants, and suddenly their area comes into within a rent pressure zone. They might be charging half of what the market rent is in the area.
And the fellow next door might be paying.
And if they...
Order. Can I just thank the Senator for explaining what I was trying to explain there with the rent pressure zones. Thank you very much. You're explaining it very well. No, I mean it. I mean it. You're explaining it very well.
I'm allowing you anyway.
So what I'm saying is you may have a landlord and the rent pressure zone comes in and that tenant moves on. They can only charge based on the rent that was there at the time for a new tenant. Should they be entitled to charge a reasonable market rent for a new tenant? Equally, in a lot of cases, Minister, within the rent pressure zones, certain landlords hiked up their rent and it may have inadvertently drove rents up. So I think what we have to do is we have to find a model until such a time as supply catches up that we get reasonable rents for people. And we fast-track a whole affordable model for people. I commend you for your efforts. On the Airbnb, very tricky, very difficult. We can't have people being fleeced on Airbnb what they're charging. But you may have people that are in specific situations where the Airbnb is only used for a couple of months of the year. And for me, it's about a couple of factors. Number one, reasonable rent for tenants. proper rights for tenants. And the number of tenants I have coming where rogue landlords are putting letters to dump them out early. And I literally look at the type of period they're entitled to. If they hadn't come to me, they'd be out 2 or 3 months earlier. Equally, I see landlords coming to me with rogue tenants. And it's about all the time finding that balance. So, Minister, I expect when you come to the detail of the scheme, we can look at it in greater detail. I know you're open to suggestions. It's about getting the model in terms of balance, both for the tenants and the landlords, that there's fairness and equity, and more particularly, that people can afford rents. And I come out of a background where I was self-employed for years, but we're dealing with this on the ground on a daily basis. And in fact, when I was here earlier, I commented to someone who was beside me that this was one of the most important debates. It's taking place, in my view, too late at night. Will it get reported? Maybe highly unlikely. This is a critical debate. So I commend.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator O'Donnell.